Amen. So was talking about this before class, decided to deviate a little from our time frame. We're going to jump forward about 1,500 years, and then we're going to jump forward quickly over 2,000 years. And we're going to look at how you get something that resembles Christmas as we know it today. Where did some of this originate from? This is a separate QR code. This is a nice pointer. So if you don't have the slides already and you want them, one last chance to grab it. I'll put it up at the end if you want it. But this is a standalone presentation.
So the QR code isn't for this one?
It's for this one. It's not with everything else.
Okay.
This one's standalone. So if you want that back at the end, I'll put it up when we're done. Or I can do it now. So while that's going, I'll go ahead and talk about what's going to be on the next slide. I wanted to put this in some semblance of chronological order of the influences on Christmas, which is interesting because I start before Jesus is born. And that's going to begin with Jewish tradition. And today we are aware that they celebrate, particularly in America, Hanukkah. This is a tradition that is mentioned in the New Testament, apparently. There's a reference, it's not one-to-one, called Hanukkah. It's called Purim, or Festival of Dedication. We'll see that in a minute. But that happens before Jesus. It's also influenced by a Roman holiday. They would call this Saturnalia. It would be a festival that they would have at the end of the year. Of course, going into winter was a very common time for festivals because now you're not working the fields. Now everybody's kind of stationary. You're not going out to war. Nobody's fighting wars in the winter. You're not tending the fields, tending crops. You might be taking care of animals still, but things are a lot more quiet, so it's very common to have these end-of-year celebrations. Of course, we have the birth of Jesus, which is the reason for the season. But in the expansion of Christianity, we start to see why these other things matter. And it's a place you might not have thought of as influencing Christmas. Another big impact is going to be immigration to America. And in America, so many of these regional traditions came over with the people, and other people got a chance to see something they had never seen before, and it caught on. It also, as technology got more modern, you started to see stuff on television and on movies that people had not been exposed to before, and they start thinking, oh, that's a good idea. So all of those influence how we get the Christmas that we have today. So to start in Scripture, Hanukkah, the definition of it is to dedicate. It's known as the Festival of Lights to the Jews, and there's a reference to this in John chapter 10, verses 22-23. And it was at Jerusalem, the feast of dedication, and it was winter. And Jesus walked to the temple in Solomon's porch. So Jesus at this time in John chapter 10 has gone to the temple. They mention it's winter and just say in passing that it's the feast of dedication. That verse would also have a footnote on it saying, or Purim. So what was this thing? The Promised Land, Judea, Israel, whatever you want to call this land, has been some of the most fought over territory in human history. Some of that is in the Bible, some of it is not. But we have a story in the book of the Maccabees. The Maccabees are a Jewish family. They are priests. This book is considered historical. It is not considered a canon scripture. If you talk to an Orthodox practicing Jew and ask them about the Maccabees, they will not put it on the same level as the Torah. The Maccabees are not Exodus. The Maccabees are not Leviticus or Deuteronomy. They're just somebody wrote down a history book. So they believe these events happened. They don't believe they're on the same level as the divine. So why does any of this matter? The Maccabees, at the time, the Judea area is occupied by the Seleucid Empire. After Alexander the Great, we've talked about him in passing, he conquers everything, which includes this land, and he lets the Jews go back to the land to rebuild the temple. The first temple had been destroyed by the Babylonians. Second temple is going to be built after they're allowed to. I said Alexander, that's actually Cyrus, so my apologies. But after that, after the death of Alexander, his empire splits into four pieces. Egypt was the Ptolemies, we mentioned that last week. Turkey was the Seleucids. So if you think Turkey kind of up here by the S, and then Egypt down here kind of by the word temple, and Israel in between kind of where this menorah is, where do these two empires fight? And they did a lot of fighting over Judea. But the Seleucids at this point in history are occupying the region of Judea, and they defile the temple. They're doing idol worship in the temple. They're doing sacrifices to idols here. And a man named Maccabee leads a revolt against it. This is a revolt that is going to have a theme of religious purity. He is a priest, and he says, you're defiling God's temple, and he rallies people to that call to drive the Seleucids out. And he will free Judea, not all of Judea, but the Jerusalem area. So it's a pretty good swath of land. We're going to see that on another slide. But the theme of Hanukkah is a theme of light. I didn't give a good explanation for this. So the menorah is a replica of one of the temple artifacts called the golden lampstand. We didn't really read about the holy artifacts that were placed in the Holy of Holies, things like the Ark of the Covenant, the Temple of Showbread, and the golden lampstand, an altar of incense. These were all things constructed by the Jews during the Exodus period. Well, in the second temple, there's a replica of the golden lampstand. They make replicas of everything except the Ark of the Covenant. They do not make a second Ark of the Covenant because it doesn't have the Ten Commandments in it. It doesn't have Aaron's staff in it, and it doesn't have the manna in it. They can't replicate that, but they replicate everything else, including the golden lampstand. Again, when the theme is purity in this rebellion, they don't have enough oil to light the lampstand for each day of the feast. And it's going to take too long to make enough oil that isn't defiled because it was handled by those bad priests over there who were part of the Seleucids and the idol worship and all that. So how do you get the pure oil in time? Well, as the Maccabees will tell it, somehow miraculously they had just enough of the pure oil that it miraculously lasted all the days of the festival until they could make the new pure oil. And it was a miracle because there's no way that oil could have lasted. Now that's the part where we're talking about this is not canon, not scriptural. So they probably just prayed over some of the other oil and said, God forgive us. But as the story of Hanukkah will go, they'll tell you the oil miraculously lasted and they were able to keep the golden lampstand lit. So that's the theme of light that's going on. And of course, God is a God of light. That's an example used over and over and over again. And obviously, in the winter season, it's important to remember that the first Christians are Jews. They're people who are in this area and are familiar with the practice of Hanukkah, of this feast of dedication. And Jesus is there for it. And his apostles are there for it. And there's, I forget the number. How many people did they consider for the apostle after Judas? Was it 130? Let's roll with that number anyways. So you're talking about somewhere near 150 people who are with Jesus probably at this time as he's gone to the temple. So it was a very familiar event to them. This is the land that is liberated from the Seleucids. Now, as you can see, it is a much smaller piece of land than the entire Promised Land. This is the River Jordan. This is the Dead Sea down here. So we're not even all the way up to the Sea of Galilee. This is a much, much smaller piece of territory. It's much more mountainous, as we've seen in previous maps. It's not out here on the coast that's easier not for armies to occupy. And this is 167 BC that the Maccabee revolts begin. And they carve out this pretty significant piece of territory, and there will be this period of independence until Rome comes. All right. So that's our first event that influences Christmas. We have the time of year. It's in winter. It's got a theme of light, particularly of God's light. And I would say the golden lampstand was sort of a prophecy, if you will. It was telling you the light of the world is coming. All right. So then we have Rome enters the scene. Rome had this practice called Saturnalia. If the name sounds familiar, well, it was in honor of their god named Saturn. Yes, the same one they named the planet after. This was a god of agriculture. So how do you celebrate agriculture? You have a big feast. And for a month, even enslaved people were given temporary freedom and treated as equals, more or less. But that was the theme of it. Businesses and schools were closed so that everyone could participate in the holiday festivities. That's the description, according to History Channel, of Saturnalia. So it would be very common that the slaves would actually get to sit at the table, and then the master of the home would serve the food for part of the feast to them. So it was a very interesting tradition. So you've got the families gathering, you've got everything closing down for this festival, and you even have this different look of how we interact with one another when even the slaves are recognized as full people. They're the same as us. Again, more or less, but that's the theme of the event. We can see where that continues. This is also around the time of the winter solstice, which that was yesterday. Romans observed another feast, I'm not going to pronounce that, honoring the children of Rome. And members of the upper classes often celebrated around December 25th. I'll just abbreviate to that. So again, the time of year when Christianity starts spreading, they are very used to having this huge festival right around December 25th. Start to see why this date became important. So what happens when you're spreading Christianity into the world? And where I said this might be first time you've heard this referenced with Christmas, the Council of Jerusalem that we read about in Acts. And we have these Gentile converts to Christianity. And the question is, what do Christians need to do? When it's not just Jews, when it's Gentiles, what is actually required of Christians is the big question they're dealing with in Jerusalem. And how do we apply this in modern times? So in Acts 15, I've skipped ahead to just the summary of events. Verse 13, when they finished, James spoke up. Brothers, he said, listen to me. Simon, this of course is Peter, has described to us how God first intervened to choose people for his name from the Gentiles. It is my judgment, therefore, that we should not make it difficult for the Gentiles who are turning to God. Instead, we should write to them, telling them to abstain from food polluted by idols, from sexual immorality, from the meat of strangled animals, and from blood. So what do Christians need to do? Do they have to stop having a party? Or does the party just need to not be about idolatry anymore? It's an interesting question to grapple with. And this is one that Christians have had disagreements about. We'll see that over the last 2,000 years. But they see a world where people are used to certain things. And one of the ways they make Christianity appealing to people who have their traditions is say, well, you don't have to get rid of the traditions. You just have to get rid of the idols. And so again, Saturnalia, we had two different pagan gods involved. Well, when we take them out, what do we have? We have a festival. We have it in winter. We have closing everything down to enjoy the time with families. We have a festival for children. Well, those are all good things, aren't they? No argument about that. As long as we take the idols out of it and recognize who is God and who is the God that gives us the chance for these things. And that is one of the interesting ways in which Christianity is going to spread from this point forward. So then, of course, we have the birth of Jesus. And I wanted to look at how his family traveled. Because obviously we've talked about Judea area, and we've talked about the Roman Empire. Well, the Roman Empire was just all of Europe, North Africa. Luke chapter 2. So Joseph went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, to the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. From Nazareth up here down to Bethlehem. This is about 26 miles. I wrote down the footnote without writing down the reason why. Luke has this interesting way of writing, and he tells you who's governing where to tell you when this is all happening. Well, he's doing this in a Roman way because Rome names the years. Particularly in the Roman Republic, the highest office was consul, and they would name the year for whoever the two consuls were. So if the consuls are Justin and Craig that year, then it's the year of Justin and Craig. That's how it would be called. When they come down to Bethlehem, Joseph's family is near. He's from this line. That's where he's going back to. So Jesus is going to be born in an area where there is a lot of family. For whatever business has taken Joseph up to Nazareth, he should still have a lot of relatives in this area. It's also very close to Jerusalem, which is where Mary's cousin is. Because before Jesus, it's John the Baptist. And Mary goes to help Elizabeth during her pregnancy. So there is family for them in this area. They're also going to be here for a while because the Magi come. And when we read about the Magi coming from the east, they're going to go up to Jerusalem. They're going to ask about this. Herod's going to send them away. He's going to ask for the priests. They're going to figure out, oh yeah, it's Bethlehem. Bethlehem is where this child is supposed to be born. He's going to send them down to Bethlehem. And just a quick passing reference in it says at that time, I'm tongue-tied. Joseph and Mary are living in a house. So they appear to have been here for a while and stay in this area. So after the Magi, they learn that Herod has ill intent. He wants to get rid of this person who might be trying to interfere with his ruling of the territory. And we read in Matthew 2, when they had gone, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, he said, take the child and mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. Then, of course, they get a head start because Herod doesn't realize what happened for a while. Because when the wise men go back by a different way, Herod has to sit around and figure out, when are those wise men coming back? What's going on? What are they doing down there? How is it taking this long? oh, wait a minute, they're not coming. To the point when he gives the order to kill the children, he says children under 2 years old. So it may have been a substantial period of time that they got this head start to come over to Egypt. This is a flight path. If you went from Tel Aviv airport down to Cairo, Egypt, just because they were two major airports, I've already done the foot route. We've seen that in the regular class, so I didn't feel like doing that same map again. But they probably would have gone a fairly coastal route for this. This is not a major excursion. You probably would have gone along well-used trading paths. And they go down to Egypt until the passing of Herod. So, historically, we now have the traditions of the Jewish people, the traditions of Rome, and the birth of Christ, giving us a reason to have Christmas. In the 4th century, Christianity is going to be legalized in the Roman Empire. In the 4th century, church officials decided to institute the birth of Jesus as a holiday. Asterisks on Pope. The Bishop of Rome, Julius I, chose December 25th in 350 AD. The Catholics love to put their titles on people from back at this time and tell you that so-and-so was a pope. It would be the Bishop of Rome. The Bishop of Rome was a real person. There is a real history of that. And that is just the lineage that they're claiming when they say so-and-so is the Pope. So when it says Pope Julius I, they're talking about a religious Christian leader in Rome at this time, Julius I, and he says, we're going to celebrate the birth of Jesus. That's going to be on December 25th. Why did he pick that name? Why did he pick that day? Well, we saw there was already a festival that people were used to having at that time. And again, what if you just take the idolatry out of it? If you had it on another day, would people still continue to celebrate the idolatry and just say, oh, we'll do this Jesus thing as well? May have very well been that they're trying to remove the idolatry completely by putting God into everything that they're doing. So it's a very significant motivation why you'd want to do this. The first record we have of Christmas on December 25th is from a calendar that's from 354. It says December 25th for Christ's birth. Now, this is talking about an archaeological artifact that somebody can pick up, see it exists, the calendar of Fallacius or chronograph of 354. That's a term you can Google if you really want to, and you can see images of this thing. And it says December 25th is Christmas. So that's how far back you can point to a single artifact saying that date. But there are mentions and written records as old as 211 AD, but that's the kind of thing where it's copied year after year after year. So it's way back, but this is written down from a single source we can look at, even pretty far back. Romans are used to having a festival at this time, and they're keeping a lot of the culture, but they're removing the pagan worship. This is how we see Christianity spreading. They go somewhere, they say, you don't have to change everything about yourselves. You're Romans. That's fine. God's not a God of this world. God's a God of everything. As long as you acknowledge God, you can still be Romans. That's how Christianity is spreading. This would be the reign of Constantine. Yes.
They also were smart enough to know that if you told people you have to stop doing this festival and start doing this one, that wasn't going to go over very well.
No, people do have a habit of fighting to keep their traditions, whatever they are. This is all the reign of Constantine. He becomes emperor 324. The Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire in 380. This is AD, of course, and that's the Nicene Creed. So they had a very big religious meeting called the Council of Nicaea. I'd have a lot more to say about that on a future time, but for our purposes, that's where Christianity is becoming the religion of the empire under Constantine. Now we're going to start jumping ahead by a lot. So we're going to look at another part of the world. Outside of the Roman Empire, there are more people in the world, strangely enough. In Scandinavia, they have this festival they call Yule. This is Norse, a recognition of the return of the sun. Fathers and sons would bring home large logs, which they would set on fire. So that's a nice little Google image of a Yule log, but we're talking big things, and this was a practice that they would have. Why did this tradition catch on in America, though? Immigrants will bring it over from Scandinavia in the 17th century, but in 1966, WPIX-TV in New York City aired a continuous 17-second loop of a fireplace along with 3 hours of holiday music. And that's how you get your modern tradition of the Yule log with Christmas carols playing, because of the 17-second clip. They would keep this tradition after that, but they would use a little bit longer stretch of film for the fireplace.
That was really just their way of giving the guys at the TV station the night off.
Well, somebody had to play the music, though. I mean, that 1966, probably somebody sat there with a record playing, honestly. Maybe they just had Jimmy the intern do it.
Yeah, they just needed one guy to man the station then.
So, of course, Scandinavia is these countries up here. It's this Eastern European area, sphere. It's where the Vikings will come from. And that's where we get the Yule log. Now, in America, mention that Christians have wrestled with the idea of what's religious and Christian and what's not. What's a little too pagan for us? And this will depend a lot on denominational fights as well. But in America, Puritans did not recognize Christmas, to the point that from 1659 to 1681, the celebration of Christmas was completely outlawed in Boston, Massachusetts. In fact, was able to get a little piece of the notice here. I fit onto the screen. Of course, Boston, Massachusetts. It's interesting because it's actually north of New York. In 1659, the Massachusetts Bay Colony enacted a law called Penalty for Keeping Christmas. I also found it interesting how they spell this, because if you don't see this very well, they spell public Publick. Of course, back then, spelling would be a lot more phonetic than it is now. And I think by then they're starting to print dictionaries and standardize spellings of things, but it'd be much more subjective. But yes, they outlawed Christmas for a time. But then what starts bringing this whole thing together? What brings all these various traditions into one event that looks like Christmas? And the person I think sits at the heart of that is Washington Irving. In 1819, he's publishing this under a pen name, but it's the Sketchbook of Geoffrey Canyon Gentleman. He's highly influenced by German folk tales. This writing will be the legends of Sleepy Hollow, Rip Van Winkle, and Westminster Abbey. I'm pretty sure you've heard of at least one of these, right? So a very influential writer, and he's the one who's putting out this sketchbook. This is a picture, which is black and white and a little dark, so I realize it's hard to see, but we've got a large gathering around the table. This is a Christmas hall dinner with quite the layout on here. There's, of course, candles. There's a lot of celebration there, and it's looking a lot like Christmas. Washington Irving is born in New York City. He dies in Tarrytown, New York. Jeffrey Crayon was a pen name that he used for short stories. So I wanted to get this as best I can. Long Island is down here, and he's up here in Tarrytown. I didn't get a nice red sticker on that, but it's the very northern part of this map. This was a hard one to get the way I wanted it to, because I wanted to have the labels on it instead of you just taking my name for it. But this is Tarrytown. So this was as far out as I could zoom and still have it say that Tarrytown is there. Okay. So we have some of our traditions in place. We've got a Yule log. We've got gathering around the table. We've got December 25th. We're seeing the pieces line up now. Where does St. Nicholas come from? A monk named St. Nicholas was born in Turkey around 280 AD. As the history tells us, St. Nicholas gave away all of his inherited wealth and traveled around the countryside helping the sick and the poor. Becoming known as the protector of children and sailors, Dutch families in New York would gather together to honor the anniversary of his death. So it's the Dutch who are bringing over into New York, which of course is a lot higher percentage of the population of the United States back in the 1600s than it is today. It's still the most populated city, but then, I don't know, you're probably talking at least 10% of the population of America in the general area. So they're spreading this tradition in to a very sizable portion of the country. So who actually was this person? Well, there's not a great biography. There's a lot of tradition about him because he does become a local legend from his acts of generosity. In the 4th century, a Christian bishop of Myra traveled around the countryside helping the poor and the sick. This here is St. Nicholas Church, and this is in Anatolia, Turkey. So this region of Turkey here, it's coastal, it's southwest. This is the area of this, which is St. Nicholas Church. They believe this to be built on top of the remains of the man known as St. Nicholas. Now, of course, the saint part comes later. They wouldn't call him that at the time. He was a bishop, would have been his formal office. In 1822, Clement Clark Moore wrote a Christmas poem called An Account of a Visit from St. Nicholas, which is more popularly known today by its first line, "'Twas the night before Christmas." And that is how you get Santa Claus added to the mix for Christmas. So now we're just starting to add more and more of these elements, and we're going to get to the poinsettia flowers. Poinsettia is named after Joel R. Poinsett, an American minister to Mexico. Think ambassador, but this is what they called it, who brought the red and green plant from Mexico to America in 1828. He was a special envoy to Mexico in 1825. He was serving in the United States House of Representatives, so he'd be in Washington, D.C. when they appointed him to this. He was a very well-traveled man through Latin America, so he was considered kind of the premier guy to appoint to this office at the time. So out of the U.S. House of Representatives, they asked him to take up this task, and he does. And he's going to go all the way from Washington, D.C. down to Mexico. I don't think I wrote this down. He's actually from South Carolina. He's from South Carolina. He'll first be elected to the to the State House of Representatives, and he wasn't even back yet. He was on his way back, and they elected him to the House of Representatives. The State House of Representatives before he even got there. So he was well thought of at the time. He'll be elected to the U.S. House, then get this appointment, and he'll go to Mexico. He saw a plant, and he sends samples of it back. And then by the year 1836, so just a little over a decade, this plant is now widely known as the poinsettia. They got to call it something, and fairly commonly, discoveries get named for whoever found them. Well, it's harder to do that with a plant. However, shorthand, here's the guy who found it and sent it to us, so we'll name it after him. You get the poinsettia. That's how it gets its name, and that's how the flower gets to America. I forgot this part on a slide. Okay. He'll also send some to California. So one of the reasons the poinsettia will very much spread is because with the advent of television, where does a lot of it originate from? California, Hollywood area. And poinsettias will start showing up there on television, and a lot more people will learn about this plant from that. But it still was well established by that point. Okay, Christmas trees. These date back to the Middle Ages in Germany, with German and other European settlers will popularize the Christmas tree in America by the early 19th century. It has a rough timeline of it. This is one where there was a lot of religious fighting among denominations about what you were going to do with these trees. In the 1500s, they were considered Protestant, so the Catholics wouldn't allow a Christmas tree because that was a Protestant thing. Nobility began adopting it by the early 19th century. So Queen Victoria is heavily credited with popularizing the Christmas tree. And when the Queen does it, the high end of society wants to do it. When the high end of society wants to do it, the middle end of society wants to do it, and everybody wants to do it. And hey, trees are pretty. People like trees. So the Christmas tree spreads out after the Queen adopts it in England. But what's the actual origin of the tree? Why is this tree becoming a Christmas tree? And we have Boniface, who's an English monk. He sees a pagan Norse ritual going on in, this would be the Germany area, and he cuts down a tree. Now, I cut off the whole legend about what he did because he supposedly miraculously cut a tree down in one strike. But then behind it was this fir tree. And he says, "Let this tree be the symbol of the true God. Its leaves are evergreen and will not die. The tree's needles pointed heavenward, and it was shaped triangularly, representing the Holy Trinity." So he says, instead of looking at your pagan trees, look at the lessons there are to learn from this tree. It's evergreen because those who are in Christ do not die. The soul never dies. It's pointed heavenward, and you have 3 points when you're looking at it: the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Every tree has 3 points whenever you're looking at it. And that is why the Christmas trees caught on. So Boniface is in the 8th century. In 723, this is called Donner's Oak. This is near Hesse, Germany, and it's the removal of pagan symbols. Let's see. I can do wreaths real quick. Wreaths started being used by the Lutherans in Germany in the 16th century. So You're talking the Reformation movement. It's a circular shape representing eternal life, and the holly and leaves and berries are symbols of Christ's crown of thorns and blood. So it's meant to represent the crown that was placed on Jesus' head when he was sent to the cross, and the circle of the wreath representing eternal life. Has no beginning, has no end. Christmas cards. First official Christmas card was in England in 1843. Not the easiest one to read. With a simple message, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you. This would be by John Callcott Halsey in London, England, 1843. This was a cool story I wanted to talk about. The idea of peace on earth is, of course, a recurring theme of Christmas, such to the point that in the first year of World War I, 1914, we have trench warfare going on, and unofficially, the troops on both sides, up and down the lines, agree to a truce on Christmas Day. It is an amazing story. If you've never heard it before, I'd strongly suggest looking it up. They would meet in no man's land. They would exchange food in several years, and several of the meetings would involve caroling. In fact, in some places, there were wars of who could sing the Christmas carols the best. That's how they were fighting on Christmas Day. Christmas hymns, Christmas carols. 4th century Rome. I'm going to really move quickly through this. It begins in Milan, Italy. Ambrose is governor of the area. He gets elected bishop as a religious leader. And the song he writes is Veni Redeemer Gentium, which is Come Redeemer of the Nations. That's the first formalized Christmas carol. Of course, that's not one we translated. Joy to the World. I've talked about Isaac Watts in the past. I love Isaac Watts. All of your modern singing begins with Isaac Watts because he says we don't just have to sing the Psalms. We can write original songs. He writes Joy to the World in 1719. It's the most published hymn associated with Christmas in North America, despite the fact it wasn't originally written for that purpose. It was just written to be a church song. Oldest continuous the same would be O Come Emmanuel, but O Come All Ye Faithful appeared in its current form in the mid-18th century. This would have been Belgium area, Belgium and German border. Silent Night is the most popular Christmas song. It's written by Francis Xavier Gruber. He's the composer, written by Joseph Moore, who was a preacher. This happens in the Austria-Germany border area. This would have been the church involved. Joseph Moore was asked to provide temporary help in this village here. That's where he writes it. Silent Night will be composed in 1818 on a 3-kilometer walk to his friend. It'll be translated to 140 languages and will become the most popular of our Christmas carols today. And there's so much more about Christmas, but that's where you get a lot of your history of Christmas as we know it today. Hope you've enjoyed.
Just had one comment real quick. And I know this is just a history of Christmas and everything.